Welcome to Fuki Cafe. I'm Ivy Cohn, and with me today is Dillon Thomson. Dillon, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you've been out on the road over the last few years making public speaking engagements on the topic of everything from climate change to resisting coal export terminals.
That's right.
And recently we've had a lot of dialogues going on out there around the rapidity with which these tipping points have now been passed and things are changing. Can you speak to that a little?
Sure, yeah. Referring to climate change in particular, it seems scientists continually find new information. It just seems to be the trend these days. Scientists figuring out that what used to be the worst case scenario in terms of runaway global warming and climate change now seem to be the more conservative, because they keep finding new feedback loops that they couldn't account for earlier on, and just new pieces of information keep coming to them. And now we're looking at, whereas it was an 11 degrees Celsius rise by the end of the century, now that we might be looking at that in 2050, or it's just things keep getting worse. And so what I've been trying to focus on and deal with for myself, and then also speak about, is how do we live our lives in the face of that? How do we live our lives in the face of all this loss, of all of these losses cascading around in the biosphere? And so I've been focusing on that and dwelling on
cascading losses.
Yeah.
Janaea Donaldson, who produces and hosts Peak Moment, recently addressed the notion of nested collapse. The climate changes are also doing that same kind of thing, where they're nesting and exponentially increasing the rapidity, which is really scary to look at.
Yeah.
And I really want to look at it, and sometimes I go, oh no, I can't look at it anymore. And I just go out and, water the garden or do something very grounding. But then I get my courage and I look again. And the notion that we're losing and could potentially, if not all, most life on Earth be gone in this century, has caused me to just want to love life even more. It is just sometimes so intense.
Yeah, I feel similarly, but it's not so for so many people. Trying to live in the face of this knowledge is difficult, and I can't say that I blame anyone for wanting to escape it and want to somehow not exist in that same world, And so many people turn to whatever distractions that they can get at. This culture is very good at providing people with distractions.
Yes.
However, you mentioned courage, and I do think that it takes some courage to bring yourself into yourself and into this world right now, and to live with that knowledge. And I don't think that living with the knowledge of imminent doom, and like you say, recognizing just how beautiful this world is, are mutually exclusive. In fact, I think they're intimately related.
Yes.
Two sides of the same coin, even.
Absolutely.
So that's one thing I try to speak about when I do presentations is I don't believe that it's possible to really taste the world and really smell it and really feel it if you're not actually in it. And to be in it, you have to recognize that this is what we're facing, that this is real, this is a part of this world. And it's been tough. It's been tough to get through to people sometimes, because I have my own sense of beauty that's been instilled in me since I was very young, and I can't always impart that to everyone. It's not as easy as speaking to someone,
getting lost in the beauty of a small little bug crawling across the top of a granite boulder, even if somebody's right there with you and you are exclaiming and just being lost in the movement of this bug, that other person may or may not have cultivated the capacity to actually, what I call resonate with that little bug there. And I mean, we could talk bugs, we could talk, you know, salmon, we could talk forests, rivers.
Right.
And it's interesting how some people just don't seem to have the capacity to deeply feel life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm not sure, it scares me sometimes, but then again, you know, taking my own advice, I have to exist in that reality. I have to exist in the reality that I was born into an extremely civilized world, an extremely citified world,
Right.
where people are born into cities and never leave them, and you know, that affects the way you feel about the world. That affects what you love in this world. Many people are made to love urban environments. They're made to love, you know, city streets and buildings, and I can't deny that.
That's been their whole reality.
Right, right. But in the face of so much biotic loss at the expense, you know, of, you know, or caused by this urban civilized culture, you know, at some point we have to put our foot down. Those who have committed themselves to the biotic world and the more than human world, more and more of us are putting our foot down and saying, listen, if this isn't a desperate situation, calling for desperate measures, we don't know what is, you know.
Yeah, this is pretty extreme.
It's pretty desperate. But, you know, my experience of this world, I truly believe that the beauty of this world and my love for the more than human world was instilled to me when I was young, because I grew up in close proximity with wild creatures. In particular, across the street from my parents' house was a huge meadow where creatures would be roaming and socializing and eating all over the place, including a herd of elk. And
Nice.
so just sitting out in the grass watching just for hours these elk just do the things they do, I feel like that entered into me and became me, literally. I believe it became my substance. And so that has pointed me towards the direction of, you know, how I should be living in this life. Honestly, it hasn't been that difficult for me to know how I should be living.
You're very fortunate.
Yeah.
Because so many people do not and have never experienced that, particularly at a formative period where, as you say, it really became part of the warp and woof of your very essence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how that is, and I do feel very fortunate about that. But what I've come to is that when I'm there watching the elk, or even now, when I go outside and watch a tree, you know, and just look at it and look at its life and try to feel its life, it is existing and living as the elk were in that moment. And they were living as they had always lived, making the world a better place by their actions and their existence. And I know that humans are capable of that too. And my love for them, my love for the elk, and my love for this more than human world exists only right now. You know, it exists here. It doesn't exist on that linear trajectory where near-term extinction, our ideas of near-term extinction might exist. Those two things are both real. But the love that is here right now, I want to let inform my actions. And
beautifully put.
that's how I orient myself right now. And that's the only way.
Being fully present with the moment has been, of course, something that has been sought after by some, completely escapes others.
Right.
We are in a very linear culture, and simply quietly being is not something that comes naturally to people. unless they have had experiences when they're younger and,
Yeah.
and have that there. So, as you said earlier, trying to impart this notion, a way of being present, fully present in the moment, which is really all we ever have.
Right, right.
To individuals for whom this may be a completely new idea,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of glaze over.
Yeah, yeah. I find that all the time, which is why I've taken up interest in different philosophers who have tried to use words to impart being in the moment to people. And you know, one of my favorite philosophers is David Abram, who sort of confronts Cartesian dualism, or that idea that René Descartes sort of, you know, brought about in our culture, the idea that our minds, that ourselves can be separated into two different things, our thinking minds and our feeling bodies. And there are many philosophers who have tried to reject that notion, and David Abram has done so in a way that I find very accessible, and other people have found accessible too. And one idea that he writes about, which I love very much, is just that to our bodies, to our sensing, feeling animal bodies, the entire world is alive. The information that enters into us through our senses is not that of dead or alive matter. Only after it gets to our socialized noggins, where we can categorize and put things into dead or alive categories, does that actually happen. So when we do exist, when we can try to exist in our senses, in our animal bodies, we're in a living world. We're in a world that is alive through and through to its last recesses. And sometimes, you know, words like this, saying words like this, can make people start to click in different ways. And you know, some people come at things from a very logical perspective, and some people come from it from a very different perspective. So it's always a tricky matter trying to impart being in the moment.
And holding both of these things is fully present in the moment aliveness.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time that we are holding these devastating pieces of information about what's coming down on the planet right now,
Yep.
has been the topic of much conversation amongst cohorts and analysts out there who are paying attention at all. Those are two really huge, conflicting things to be holding.
Mm-hmm.
The extreme devastation and the extreme beauty of life.
I agree, and I think it probably, you know, it's going to require stepping through a threshold of grief to get to that point, to hold those things. And then also what I've come to realize is that the nature of holding those things can be fluid. And I feel like we have to allow it to be fluid. And this goes back to what I was saying about humans it's not really our thing to exist in this very civilized notion of linear time. So while I might agree with the science that's been coming out, I agree with it. I agree that maybe even that near-term extinction is a real thing. I'm not forcing myself to think about that 24/7. That's not what I think we should do.
I think that's abuse to ourselves.
Yeah,
really.
Exactly. But many people feel, I think, they have a misconception about when we do talk about these things and say that we do need to be real about it, that we do need to be miserable all the time. And that's absolutely not what we're saying at all. It's a very fluid thing. And if you allow it to be fluid, that's when the beauty will be able to come in to you. And you will be able to experience that. I think we're perfectly capable. I mean, I feel pretty capable. We're malleable, porous creatures, and as devastating as what we're talking about is, we have limitations. You know, we can't wrap our heads around things for reasons. You know, our creaturely bodies weren't necessarily built for that. So, I wanted to emphasize that this can be a fluid thing, and that we're complex enough creatures to hold all of these very complex and devastating and beautiful ideas and feelings and still go on and still live with integrity.
Absolutely. And it is very challenging. There's a wonderful man by the name of Martin Prechtel who has spoken on, well, hi there, Zeekly. Have you decided to come in and join the conversation today? This is Zeekly the dog. Sit down. Have a seat. Martin Prechtel talks about grief and praise. And it's very similar to what we're talking about here, in that unless you have really courageously looked at what is going on and felt it deeply, just as Martin says, unless you have allowed yourself to fully feel and express the grief, you cannot fully feel and express the praise of life.
Right.
And it's a very similar thing. So people who are pretty anxious about looking at what is so, if they can look at a little bit, then on the flip side, they can be just that little bit more fully alive.
Yeah.
And we are complex, amazing creatures and very adaptable, which in some of the recent articles I've read, that adaptability factor may in fact be what perhaps allows a few humans to survive through what's coming.
Yeah.
And if not, well, planet Earth will carry on.
Yeah.
So, well, where might we go from here?
Well, we could go to something that I was thinking while you were just talking about was what I do try to say to people in my talks about my idea of how to live with integrity. And of course that means something different for every single person, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done. But one thing I want to be very clear about with folks is that if we give in to what this culture wants us to do, which is to eat up its distractions voraciously and to stay disengaged, to stay sedated, you're doing a disservice to yourself, and you're doing a disservice to the world that birthed you. And so what it's going to come down to is something that you mentioned earlier, courage. The courage to bring yourself up to your full height and to stand up and to be with all these things that we've been talking about, and then decide for yourself the moral course for you, and whatever that means for you, and go for it. Go with it. With passion.
Yes.
Because your beating heart is not going to wait. It's not going to wait for you. It's there. I mean, it is waiting for you to jump on board and flow with whatever's going to take you. But let it take you. Because that's what we need. And I believe, like you say, if we're gonna have any chance of survival, a few of us surviving, it's going to be through the passion and dedication and just downright work that people can do.
And there is, the passion factor is so important for someone, who's passionate about the salmon. That's where they put their focus. That's where they wake up and breathe and live salmon. For somebody else, it may be taking a stand against the coal export terminals up north, along the Pacific Northwest, which 3 of them have,
dropped off,
which is fabulous news. Everybody has a place where their passion can come up. And that's, I think, what people, they say, well, what can I do? What can I do? This is happening. Find something that really means something to you.
Yeah.
And put your focus there. It takes all of us doing what we can do and what we're inspired to do.
And non-humans are already holding up their fair share of the work just by keeping the world intact, as much as they can. And you mentioned Martin Prechtel. I actually listened to a different interview that he gave a while ago, and he just made the point, the grass is very diligent to grow every day, and the trees are very diligent to grow, and the animals are very diligent to keep on just living. And that to me could be my foundation for how I orient myself, a pretty big foundation for me. Just that we're surrounded by every single other creature and every single other life form is very diligently living out its life. And because I've, studied a little anthropology, it doesn't take much to know that humans came from that same fabric, that same fabric of stuff, and we've lived with the same simple, humble, earthy integrity that everyone around us, is continuing to live by. So it might take going outside for a long period of time and just sitting with a creature or a patch of grass or something, just listen to it.
Oh, listening. And that is something that this very distraction-oriented culture is not very good at doing.
Yeah.
Simply being quiet and listening. Just that can have a huge impact.
I agree.
I love the diligence of the grass. That's great. But there is a diligence, and we humans, particularly in Western industrial culture, we are very diligent at denial and consumerism and making a mess of things and being way out of touch with our bodies and our feelings.
Right.
So if somehow we can take that diligence, it's being used.
Yeah.
And shift the awareness to where that diligence could be being applied.
And another source of inspiration for how to do that, for me, it's also come from looking at past social movements that humans have been involved with. I realize that we're in a desperate situation now, so I want to look back and see how have humans behaved when they've been confronted with desperate situations. So, I've looked at everything from, the Holocaust to the, apartheid in South Africa, and to, the suffragettes movement, the civil rights movement. All of these were situations in which certain groups of people were confronted with very desperate, sometimes, entire groups of peoples and families were confronted with their death, with their slaughter. And how did they behave? People formed resistance movements, so, it's possible to come out of desperate situations with a pretty strong moral heading, and sometimes you're able to fight to the victory. I know that the situation we're talking about is much more all-encompassing, and perhaps, one of the most, if not most, desperate things that we've ever confronted as an entire species. But my sense is that we should still look to our predecessors for inspiration, and that's why I'm involved with the work I'm doing with a group called Deep Green Resistance, which is a group that's looking to those social movements explicitly, actually, to learn about how they organized, just how they organized sometimes above ground groups to go leafleting and picketing and campaigning, and sometimes in the more desperate situations would organize underground movements to take out the enemy occupying forces' established infrastructure, when that was appropriate. And because, like I said, this is more desperate than anything I've ever learned about.
Well, I don't think that the human species as a whole has ever faced anything quite like this.
Yeah.
Although there are some thoughts that there was some kind of a geologic moment, 10,000 plus years ago, that resulted in a traumatic stress response by humans, which, forget who said it, oh dear, that civilization itself is a post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, interesting. That came out of that event. Okay.
But as a planet, I mean, in previous times there was another continent. There was another place to go. Well, we have now circumnavigated the globe, and there isn't any place else to go.
Right.
and it is quite intense.
Mm-hmm.
And all the more reason to be in our joy.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's the holding of those two pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Coming back to the notion of any organization, any group of people who are organizing to affect change.
Mm-hmm.
Deep green resistance is one
Mm-hmm.
of many.
Yeah.
Through history, one of the things that allowed these groups to be successful was actually looking at what was really so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the more people, the current time, can look at what is really so,
Yeah.
not shy away from the scariness of it,
Right.
the more effective they can be,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what it is they're being effective at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being fully present and fully alive.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, and it's really difficult because our culture just convolutes everything so much, and the same culture that is eating the earth away every single day is the same culture that has an extremely intricate and sophisticated method of inundating us with images and texts and messages about what we should be doing. And those of us who care about what's happening on the planet, it's also found ways to inundate us with false solutions, and those solutions never actually challenge the foundations of this giant beastly culture that's eating everything. And that's just it. That's what I want to exist with first and foremost, is the most basic situation that we're dealing with. And that is that the earth is just being eaten by this very singular culture that spans the globe. And like you've said, we've circumnavigated it, and there's nowhere left to run to. But another one of my favorite, philosopher poets is Derek Jensen, and in his speeches that he gives around the country, he brings up an example of, you could probably ask any reasonably intelligent 12-year-old how to stop climate change that's been caused mostly by the burning of oil and gas. Mm-hmm. And they would give you one answer. Probably they would say, well, stop burning oil and gas. But you ask, a person in their mid-30s who's working for a eco-groovy consulting firm or something like that, and they'll probably give you a much different answer. One that's probably a bit more apologetic to the system and to their company even, maybe. So another thing I really, really want to encourage people to do is to look past all the bullshit and to really sit with what they feel is going on. I don't expect them to take what I feel is going on as the truth by any means, but I want to make sure that they know that this culture is purposefully giving us false solutions. And so, yeah.
Most people now, even the ones who are completely asleep at the wheel, have a sense that things are not right. And I do encourage people to go with what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Don't trust what you've read or what you've heard or what this endless, dis and misinformation that's constantly being, thrown at us. Actually go with what your intuitive sense is and be with that. Honor that. You're probably right.
Yeah.
And those are those baby steps towards becoming fully present
Yeah.
and grounded and being able to resonate with life.
Yeah.
I mean, our bodies are made of the stuff of the stars.
Yeah.
Everything is interconnected and interrelated. We are the universe.
Yeah.
Each little piece and part that's exemplifying aliveness.
Yeah.
So where are you headed next to share this information? Do you have some speaking engagements coming up?
Not currently. They're always popping up though, so I'm sure that'll change pretty soon. I do mostly administrative type work with Deep Green Resistance now. We're a group that has chapters all over the world at this point, and we're a steadily growing movement. Mostly what we're doing is the education. Mostly just trying to talk about the things that we've talked about today, just about, having the courage to get past the denial of living in this desperate situation, looking at the solutions that this culture proposes and with a critical eye, and talking about past social movements and seeing how they might influence us and direct us, for those of us who are interested in fighting back for what we love. So that's mostly what I'm doing these days when I'm not outside trying to, just be. Yeah,
fighting back for what we love. And if you put that in the context for the viewers out there, of their own immediate families, if they were being threatened,
right,
by someone or something that could possibly end their life, well, yeah, they're going to fight back. They're going to grab what's handy, the fire poker, and whack that person right down.
Right.
Ooh, our planet is under attack. That which we love, that gives us life. So why are we not picking up the fire poker?
Right. Exactly.
Because it's just the macro expression of the micro of our own intimate beloveds, children, other, significant others. But that's the trees and the rivers. And
right. It's our family.
It's our family.
It is our family. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I guess you could say we're trying to get people to pick up the proverbial fire poker. Yeah.
And take a stand. Well, Dillon, this has just been a delightful conversation.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you're able to join me today here in the greenhouse on a mountain ridge somewhere on the Pacific Northwest. And perhaps we'll gather again together at some point.
I hope so.
And in the meantime, you can certainly see this episode of Fuki Cafe on YouTube. You can also go to greenresistance.org if you'd like more information on that. And be well. Until next time, I'm Ivy Cohn.